revive that spirit amongst ourselves, because we are faced with everywhere with governments which don't serve us. But rather than to say that, I'm explaining it in monetary terms, and basically what we need to take away from this is a concrete understanding, which you will have if you pay attention to this material, a concrete understanding that every government of the world has been usurped for the purposes of exploitation through a central banking system. There is no reason whatever, not only is there no reason whatever, but there is no power whatever but exploitation in the obfuscation of currency which has been imposed upon us, and this will become apparent as we go on through our a discussion here. But I was explaining how the security market failed as a result of artificial multiplication of indebtedness. So what happened is no one, because everyone would be doubling their money, so to speak, is in our example. And I don't mean to imply that this was uniform or that was the minimal gain in such a short period either. We have what you might consider to be artificial prosperity, but by nature, as you'll soon understand, it's temporary. And when it fails, all of the gains are forfeited. The central banking system becomes the real owner of basically all property. And in fact, even from the beginning of the issuance of this kind of currency, they are really the lawful owner by usurpation of basically everything that's financed. In any case, so with these kinds of gains being made on the securities market, you were a fool to save your money. Instead of putting it in the bank and collecting a tiny bit of interest, menial interest over a long period of time, you paid a tiny bit of interest over a short period of time, and on a further, debt, and purchased all the stock that your savings could leverage, and since that was a fraction, by buying on margin of the cost of the securities, you reaped substantial gains. So long as this sequence of ever greater, we usually like to say value. The value of our homes is appreciating, for instance. Well, I prefer to say cost, because cost is the true fact. All we're realizing is greater cost. Is it a benefit that a house costs more to you? Well, if so, why not a loaf of bread? Why not a sack of beans? Why not every bottle of ketchup? Truth of the matter is it's costing you more, and it's to your detriment, not to your benefit. And we can actually show this mathematically, and you'll understand it by the time we get to the end of this explanation I'll try and make a brief explanation of mathematically perfected economy, and you might ask me further about anything that you might want me to emphasize, or sure, someone could call in and ask me to elaborate further on a point. So we'll try and rush it through this quickly, but anyway, I'm explaining why the Great Depression occurred, and that was this falsified bubble, if you will, is a modern term for it. But I think that's a poor term. It's certainly not. It's ambiguous. It doesn't really refer to what's going on here. We actually have a false appreciation of so-called value, but actual cost of assets, which is inflated by multiplication of indebtedness, and this is what's important to understand about it. So what happens is everybody invests their savings in the stock market, and on these short promissory notes reaps substantial gain in a short period of time, and so instead of savings, and this is why there was no savings, you invested in the securities market, and then all of a sudden, one day, when this this stock that so many shares were $1,000, now the same so many shares are, $20,000, and instead of loaning $9,000 to fund this purchase, they're loaning $180,000, and the Federal Reserve sees that this is all going to come down, and it's not as if they're going to lose, because a central bank in effect cannot lose. It can be deprived unearned profit, but it cannot lose. There is no actual mathematic way for a central bank to lose. Now, you ask, well, what is he saying then? Oh, we're seeing banks collapse all around the world. No, those banks are not the central banks. Those banks are the middleman who act between the central bank and us, the people who are the subjects of this central banking system. So anyway, what happens is one day the Federal Reserve says, we're not going to make any more short-term loans on these 15-day, 20-day, 30-day promissory notes. So what happens is you're faced from the moment of that announcement. Let's say it comes in a Friday afternoon. You spend the weekend thinking about having to unload your $1,000 worth of stock, to go back to our initial example, for which you've borrowed $9,000 and or $900 on top of $100 of savings. Now that $100 is all that's actually in circulation, and you don't have it, and neither does anyone who is the market for these stocks. So the market has actually no money, and they've just been deprived of any further credit, which is absolutely necessary to buy this stock for the $1,150 that would have been necessary to fulfill this sequence, which is suddenly ended because we've exceeded our creditworthiness. No one has the kinds of assets to secure such a loan anymore. So under the facade that they might lose, the Federal Reserve makes this change, and suddenly you're subjected to different situations, which actually have manifested out of the nature of the currency and the willingness of the central bank to do this so that it can dispossess us. And it's dispossessing us all the while by multiplying artificial indebtedness, largely of the regular circulation, which doesn't apply to this securities market example. In any case, so when they do this over the weekend, you're faced with a decision of what to do. And obviously, if you wait to unload your stocks, there will even be less money available to purchase them, and so you are really forced with an obligation to immediately offer your stocks up for sale to minimize your losses. So on your $100 of savings, now suddenly everyone puts their stocks up for sale to a market deprived of any credit to buy them at the sequence of falsely appreciated value or cost. And so what happens is,
oops, I think I've lost.
Mathematically impossible for
I lost you there for a moment.
It's not the securities market. Are we back there now?
Yeah, I have you back again. Sorry about that.
Okay, so I have no idea what's been missed here, but
just the last sentence.
Well, what I said was that it's mathematically impossible for anything else to happen, but for the market to collapse. So, what the financial community wants is that we go on to believe this stupefied thought, that is a thought stripped of all relevant meat, that the securities market collapse is what caused the first Great Depression. No, the fundamental cause was the obfuscation of currency, around which all of these different manifestations occur, such as this falsified bloating of the costs or value of securities. But a first part of our thesis of mathematically perfected economy, then, that is, this is not a thesis of what solves our issues, but it's a thesis of a terminal problem. By terminal, I mean that what it does is it dispossesses us to an ever greater degree until the economy, likewise, can only collapse. And in fact, the securities market collapse is just a further manifestation of this obfuscated currency. Well, what is this currency like? It's as if someone is stealing out of your garage, and it's a banking system, and they're telling you that what you have to do, though every night they come and they steal more, they're telling you that the solution is to give them more, and to give them more until they're asking actually that you give them, resupply your garage with more than you can even afford to supply your garage. How does this work? There's other people that have said similar things, but I've never found that any of them explained this. I think this idea was on the tip of Thomas Jefferson's tongue. I was quoted once, and my website has been the source of this quote, which has been altered and plagiarized all over the internet without citing any original source. And long ago, I was informed by academia that Jefferson never said this. Originally, because it was presented to me by a person of substantial historic knowledge, and that person had absolutely no motive to obfuscate a quote from Jefferson or to put words in Jefferson's mouth. And the reason I say that is at the end of the lecture, I asked him if he understood what that meaning. He had no idea that what he had quoted Jefferson to have said reflects this idea that I'm presenting to you, that any economy based on interest-bearing debt ultimately terminates itself under insoluble debt. And what was quoted of Jefferson, and I'll give it to you now, is he said, according to this lecture, he said, if the American people ever allow the banks to issue their currency, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations which will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake homeless on the continent their fathers had conquered. Well, according to this lecture, he had said this in response to Alexander Hamilton, who was proposing upon a fledgling nation to create a first central bank. He was actually advocating that we go into debt. That indebtedness would be a benefit to us, because then we would be given more and more credit. Well, of course, we would need more and more credit. But anyway, this idea that any economy based on interest-bearing debt is simply this then. Any and all money that comes into circulation as a promissory note subject to interest. So what is introduced to circulation is equal to the principal. But the obligation that exists is to pay the principal, or the entire circulation, plus all the interest on the debt out of circulation. So even as we begin to service any initial debt, there's an inherent deflationary aspect of this currency, which is requiring us to pay both principal and interest out of circulation. So because we need the circulation to sustain the industry, which is obligated to service the debt, this means that what principal we have to pay out of circulation, we have to borrow back into circulation, and what interest we have to pay out of circulation, we have to borrow back into circulation. Well, some will argue that no, not all of it, that's not true. Well, in truth, in the end, all of it you do have to borrow back in, because the only way for anything else to happen is the banking system has to consume that much of our production. But if the currency equals the production, that means that they have to consume more production than exists. That's a little difficult for a lot of people to grasp, and you don't really need to grasp that. But you might think about it because that's the essence of disproving this allegation that there's some way to overcome this. There isn't. No one has ever. There's people that claim to have invalidated this proof of inherent failure, but you won't find their proof. They're just claims. And there's very